October 14th, 1969. Marjorie Fish speaking. I think probably the best way to answer your questions is if I send you the material as I have it now. I have only a few copies and I would like it back after a bit. But this way you could go over the material and decide for yourself what the questions are that you want to ask, and we could go over more of it in much more detail then, rather than starting from scratch. There's quite a bit of material. I hate to write. I'm a rotten feller. But I've done more writing in this last year than I think I've done in the previous 20. Much of the material is highly technical, but I'll explain anything you have any questions on later when you have a chance to talk with me on it. There's still a lot that I haven't put into writing, but the writing hits most of the high points of the research. As for the books and materials used, I was using the star catalogs that are used at the observatories for the positions of the stars and the parallaxes, and I have the complete rundown of all the available parallaxes that I know of. That's the Yale Trigonometric Parallax Catalog, the Bright Star Catalog, the Yale Trigonometric Parallax Catalog Supplement from 1962, and the Gleice Catalog. I was using the Gleice catalog for the most part, and you'll get a chance to see these. The data was very, very hard to come by. The material is, just isn't normally used by lay people, and so it just is not available in libraries. And I wrote to a number of universities, and I went to observatories, and I went to planetariums, and very few people had the catalogs, and practically no one would allow anyone to use them or even look at them. And finally at Perkins, 2 years after I started trying to get this data, I was able to get into the Perkins Observatory through the kindness of the librarian, and she allowed me to look at them. I found which catalogs I needed and hurriedly copied the data because, again, I wasn't supposed to be there, and she was very kind letting me in, and they've been very kind since then. Practically rolled out the red carpet, and it's just made me feel marvelous because I've had this terrific time getting them data. As for the textbooks or sources of material to determine which stars could have planets with life, those were listed, parts of them were listed in that list that I gave you at the meeting, if you picked up one of those. Sagan's Intelligent Life in the Universe, and of course he's a radio astronomer and quite highly thought of in that field, is more or less accepted on the astronomy part. Su Shu Huang has done a review of his book, and he recommends the astronomy part, although he doesn't go along too much with the extraterrestrial part. None of mine is based on the secondary part of the book, just on the straight astronomy. Firshoff would be the most controversial. He's a member of the Royal Astronomical Society, but he has quite a bit of speculative data, but he labels it as such and gives the pros and cons for his data as he goes along. And I thought his ideas were quite interesting, although I found some flaws in some of them. There's quite a few textbooks out now on exobiology. Most of these came out after 1963. Stephen Dole has one, or actually two out, one published with Isaac Asimov. And Arcade, I'll have to look up his first name, has one out, and there's quite a few others. Again, there's nothing particularly controversial over these. Pretty much boils down to that a star like the sun is going to have planets like our own, or could have planets like our own. So you need a star within a very close range of the sun, and it would have to be a single star, generally speaking. Some controversies on whether they could be doubles or not, but I was working strictly with the single stars. Question on the margin of error in the stars. It would be, at most, when the model was first made and the pictures taken, hanging error of half a light year, but I doubt if there'd be anywhere near that much. Assuming that the parallax measurement that the astronomers took was correct. Now, as the star is close to the Earth, the parallax measurement is much more accurate. As it gets further out towards the 32 light years, the measurement gets further and further off between the different catalogs. When you get out to 100 light years, you've got quite a margin of error. By the time you get to 200 light years, you better forget it. Go to some other kind of measurement rather than the trigonometric parallax. Actually, most of the stars are very close from one catalog to another with, just part of a light year difference in their measurement. A few of them are 2 or 3 light years of difference. The unfortunate thing is that the base stars happen to be one of the ones where there's quite a bit of difference in the different catalogs. The latest published measurement would put it out to around 38 light years. The one I was using before I got that measurement, and when the model was made, I didn't get that measurement until after that model was made, but was at 30 light years, which is the Cape parallax from Africa. I suspect, if my interpretation is correct, that either the Cape parallax or some way about halfway between the two is their actual distance out. Gliese parallax for that particular star is farther out than that yet, too, and if it is as far as the Gliese catalog states, I would say that probably the pattern is just coincidence. Know quite what to say about publishing, because I really wasn't intending to do much in the way of publishing. I have quite a regard for Fuller, and I really enjoyed talking with Mr. Neff. But I made the report basically for APRO as an APRO member, and I want to give them a chance to act. Dr. Stanford and I have been in communication. He's been pretty busy and hasn't had a chance to do too much with it yet. And he may not understand quite how I placed the stars in the model. Dr. Mitchell of Perkins asked me to come down and show him just how I did it, because he was teaching a class in stellar mechanics, and he wanted his students to see the model and to go over this placement idea, to have some basic idea on how it was done. Send you his latest letter that more or less confirms that the model is at least reasonably accurate. He has been very kind. It does not mean that he agrees with my extraterrestrial theory of the UFOs, because my work at Perkins Observatory has been basically strictly astronomy, and I've gone over it with him, but I didn't put him on the spot by asking him what he thought of it. It's kind of a touchy situation. As I mentioned before, it's very hard for an amateur to get into an observatory in the research part, and I wouldn't want to do anything that would embarrass the people who are kind enough to let me in and to help me. Fully in accord with you in that I don't want to get into the pulp magazines, and as I say, I wanted it basically for APRO. I also had sent material to Dr. Hynek, who I think is a fair and impartial judge. I don't know if he's reading it or not. He was very kind in having an associate answer some of my astronomy questions. However, neither one of them had read the report very carefully, but it was very long, and I can see why they might not. Also want a copy to go to Jock Valley if I can ever get in touch with him, because he was the one who first got me interested in UFOs. The FSIC, these were the only ones I was really interested in getting the report to. Not even completely sure that it should be generally made public, because it's a lot easier to weed through contact reports when you have some basic idea of what's going on, and which ones can be reliable and which ones aren't reliable. Since contact reports are so interesting, and since you seem especially interested in them, I was wondering if you could help me out in one particular aspect. I remember vaguely reading of a contact report where the contactee said that they had claimed they had visited 40 different worlds. And if my mapping theory is correct, this will be approximately how many they may have gone to. I can explain this more to you later, too, but right now they showed about between a fourth and an eighth of the sky area, and there were 10 stars beside the base stars, so 40 would be approximately correct if they're visiting in all the other directions also. Tried to find this report, but I've got so many reports. I get all sorts of different kinds of materials Some of it extremely poor, some of it pretty good. I do subscribe to the Flying Saucer Review from England, so I know what you mean about that magazine. Do you remember any contact reports where 40 different places were mentioned? To the part on the astronomy part, trying to develop this at Perkins as much as possible, and then let them carry it through if there's anything in it. It needs to be carried out to the 65 years at least to make sure that this star grouping is not just a neighborhood quirk and is actually what is happening out in space. To see these groupings of like stars in a catalog would be very difficult, and I'll explain that too in star placement in the catalogs. I'm planning on building possibly 2 models out to 65 light years, one with just the stars brighter than the absolute magnitude of plus 7.5, and the other would be have all the stars in. Now there's 1,000 stars, actually 1,000 systems, many of these are double stars, 65 light years. And this raises problems in hanging them because your lines are getting so close together. If I would use the same size base, which means I should go to a larger base, and this creates other problems in handling anything that large. If there are problems with the lines tangling, so I'm going to have to work out some ideas on this before I actually go ahead and start it. To be turning the tape over now, so it'll have at least some leader here. You can tell I'm still rather self-conscious of this tape recorder. The thing I'm working on is all the stars that could have planets with life out to 100 light years. I have the 65 light year listing done, although I'm rechecking it with the double star catalog to see if any of these are spectroscopic binaries that weren't marked as such in the other catalogs. Markings for binaries are quite often found in the footnotes, and sometimes these footnotes are not as accurate as they could be. Sometimes, too, the person who's writing the catalog isn't interested in that particular aspect and doesn't mark it as such. And so you may think you have a single star, it's really a double. And, of course, the doubles aren't nearly as likely for life. Listing of stars and the model should take at least the full winter, if not a couple years, because I'm starting from scratch for the 100 light year model. Again, I'll have to explain some of these things when we get together, and I can show you the catalogs themselves and what it entails. Neff asked me about the possibility of going on radio, but I carried it for the time being. I just don't know. I'm not very keen on public speaking. In fact, the talks before the Akron group, as I mentioned before, was my first real voluntary public speaking. For teachers, sometimes I have to do some in the PTAs or something, but I slip out of it every time I possibly can. If APRO doesn't act, I would probably go to Fuller or Neff. It's that important. As I said before, I don't want it to get in the wrong hands. I was basically aiming it at the people who could understand the star data, because I don't want it accepted at face value. This is why I was so tickled to get your letter, because you're the first one of all the groups that really wanted proof, and this is what I want. I want someone to actually examine it, to give their opinions, to try to tear it apart and see what makes it tick and see if they can find any flaws with it. I've gone over it with a fine-tooth comb. I've checked the stars in the basic pattern in the double star catalog, which just came out. I just got it a couple of weeks ago and found any flaw in it. Except the 2 stars where the line was a little bit shorter, actually considerably shorter, than Betty had drawn on her map, and which I think is because they were large jumps, and she could see they were large jumps. And so she made her lines long instead of the short lines that they show from her particular viewing angle. Again, if you could take the map and actually see the model, and though I don't have my model anymore because I'm giving it to the Ohio State University, or Perkins, anyway, I'm leaving it to Dr. Mitchell's discretion what he wants done with it. My niece has made one for a science fair project, and you could get a very good idea from it. The fact that it is not easy to make a pattern similar to Betty's map and have it be a logical pattern to judge for yourself when you actually do it. Written report is long, rambly, and repeats itself quite a bit. I had originally intended just to make the star catalog, and then I decided I better put a page on it giving what the abbreviations are. Most astronomers know these automatically, and so it's not really needed there. And then I thought, well, I better have a paragraph trying to explain how I did the model. Put it on page by page, not necessarily in the order in which they're now clipped. And the writing of it took over, well, I started it in February, and I didn't finish with the main party of the mimeographed writing until June. And since then I've been adding pages that I've been duplicating in the copy machine at the Bowling Green Library. So all in all, it's been written over a period of 9 months. These things were suggested by some teachers who were rather interested and read it and felt they didn't understand, so they wanted a little more explanation, and so I added these, but it still is not particularly well organized. So you kind of have to dig to get the information. It's quite a rough draft, and I'm not intending to write a book or anything. The rough draft is going to be it. This was not made for publication. It was made strictly as a research project for ACRO to do what they thought best if they ever act on it. And I assume eventually they will. I have had some communication from them recently that they're considering it, and it looks quite promising. If they understand how the model's put together, it's really not that hard to do. And it would make an interesting project for anyone interested in astronomy or interested in knowing how the near stars do fit together. My qualifications to do this research: I've had one course in astronomy in college about 20 years ago, which doesn't amount to much, except it did show me star placement. And quite an interest in it since childhood. But my main interest has been in biology and anthropology. My degree was in sociology. I went back for my teaching credits later. I also had what amounted to the pre-med course with a great interest in biology. The passion is anthropology. It makes ufology so interesting when you can consider how many different kinds of cultures there might be and add to this a different biological background, which could lead into even more complex and far-reaching cultural differences. Prospects are highly intriguing, to say the least. I don't know what to do about mentioning this right now. I don't want anything in print for a while yet until APRO has a chance to act, since they have been doing some of the checking on it. I hope. I wouldn't care if your friend heard the tape, but I wish he wouldn't print it at this moment then. A report I forgot to mention, I have quite a bit of speculation, but where it is speculation, it is marked as such. Being speculation, this could or may not be true, and any reason that it is not true, I would gladly accept and toss it out. It's just thoughts for mulling over and working with, and possibly letting some other ideas come up. The astronomy data, however, is as accurate as I can get it. There might be some copy errors where I would have a catalog number inverted or something like that, which happens in the best of catalogs, and I'm doing my best to find these and change them. But other than this, they are checked and rechecked, so I don't think you have anything to worry with on the strictly astronomy data. I'll see you later then. Sincerely, Marge Fish. P.S. already. While I was waiting for the astronomy data, I tried to check out some of the more far-out aspects, and I went into hypnotism with whatever material I could get a hold of, and read quite extensively in the field, and tried experiments in it to see exactly what could or could not be done. Also, automatic writing and the experiments with telepathy and other ESP matters. These experiments, of course, are not nearly as extensive as the astronomy data and really don't prove anything. They're, I think, rather interesting as far as indicating what might be done for further experiments. They are certainly not conclusive. I originally had no intention of including any of this data in the report because it does sound a little far out, but probably for completeness it ought to be in. Just finished reading Dr. Sprinkle's article on UFO percipients in the latest Flying Saucer Review special. Goes into the more far-out aspects. I thought he might be interested in the research that I'd done in this area, so I'm sending him a letter explaining what I discovered, and also since he knows Betty, I thought he would be interested in the proof that her report is accurate. I'll include a copy so that you can read it. As I say, this isn't the same quality or certainly isn't definite respect compared with the astronomy data. Because of its controversial character, I would not normally have included it. There are several things I didn't mention about my talk at Akron. One was I only got through about half of the data I had ready to present there, and I'd be quite happy to go over the rest of that data with you if you're interested. Much of it, again, is rather technical, but has probably importance in weeding through contactee reports and judging which ones could be or which ones definitely are not true. If there's any chance of your reading the chapters in Sagan's Intelligent Life and Universe before we meet, just the chapters on star formation and which stars could have planets and planet formation, his write-up is fairly clear, and I think you might have a better understanding of what we're going into. This is October 19th, 1969, Marge Fish speaking. I received the tape and your letter. Thank you very much for both. After listening to this letter, you may decide I'm too much of a kook to go any further, and perhaps you're right. My interests range from A to Z, anthropology to zoology, including archaeology, astronomy, art, and I do sculpture and drawing, botany, chemistry, physics. In photography, I do my own darkroom work, and every new media and art must be tried out, and I use things in areas where they aren't normally used. I found that the auto body plastic works marvelously for sculpture, but the aluminum plastic doesn't. So things are always in a mess one way or another. Naturally, I want my work recognized and respected by leaders in the field and want the knowledge gained to be used. But that's the whole purpose of the research. I don't want publicity. I chose the people the copies were meant for with care. APRO, FSIC, Heineken Valley are not going to jump at announcing the findings until a careful check has been made. Most of these people either have astronomical background or resources in the field for checking. The only problem is getting them to really look at it and check it out. This has proved much more of a problem than I realized. With a claim like mine, I had expected them to become at least intrigued enough to try to disprove it, then become interested enough to try to follow it through when they could not disprove it. I'm sure of the data within reasonable limitations. I had assumed that everyone in the field wanted to know where they came from. I put in cross-references and extra data so it could be spot-checked in a matter of an hour or two and thoroughly checked in about 2 days, point by point. The model could be built and checked inside of a week. Everything I've done can be checked. Since I've worked out all the methods, these could be followed and redone far easier than the first time, while the method of attack had to be worked out. Star catalogs were used for cross-checking, so things missed by one would be caught in the next. Actually, for an astronomer, spot-checking is very easy if they would take the time. Once it is checked, APRO could take the credit and the headaches. APRO is running a contest for the best research, the Dr. Fondas Memorial. Mr. Greenwell wants me to enter it, but I disqualified myself as Dr. Hynek is a judge, and I wrote him before I knew that, for help in the astronomical questions. I wrote Hynek and told him I was disqualifying myself so that he could answer the questions. So I had started the research years before and will be continuing it for years after, probably. It was made as my contribution to APRO research and not as a money-making project. Not that I couldn't use the money. APRO is finally rolling, and somewhat anyway, on checking. I offered to take the material to Dr. Stanford in person this summer and talk it over with him, but he was too busy at the time. This would have been the longest trip I've ever made if he had said it was all right to come ahead. Dr. Greenwell has talked to Dr. Stanford over the phone and said that he thinks it's very promising. Dr. Stanford on the spot, too. I'm afraid I bugged APRO quite a bit. Betty asked him about it, too, to get it rolling. A copy minus the UFO data was left at Perkins, but I didn't think that any professional astronomer would be interested in that part. But Dr. Mitchell was. He asked me down to explain the model, and I talked the UFO material over with him also. Although he's not a UFO buff, he listened. I half expected to get tossed out on my ear, and gave me much help on my questions about the methods of solving problems, galactic coordinates. I use celestial sphere coordinates, not galactic, and so forth. Dr. Hynek worked at Perkins in the past. Now, I don't know if he and Dr. Mitchell are acquainted, but he still probably has connections at Perkins. A technician with the last name of Hynek is at Perkins now. He might be a son or nephew. In any case, professional astronomy is a tight group, with most astronomers knowing each other, at least by reputation. I asked Dr. Mitchell to send a note to Dr. Hynek, his honest opinion of the accuracy of the model. I don't know if he'll do it. It's quite a bit to ask. But he wrote me saying that he did not find any errors. There probably are slight ones now, as the models had pretty rough treatment. It was out there in that July 4th tornado weather, and it was been taken apart 3 times, and the cats have been in it. It was knocked over once, and the strings may be stretched a little bit on a few of them. It won't be enough to throw it off very much, but it should be off a little from what it was when the pictures were taken. Trade work and visit other observatories, and I'm hoping Hynek will either have to come to Ohio State on business or to visit his relative, or I'd be intrigued. In any case, I hope he gets a chance to look at the model. Either Dr. Mitchell or I could explain Betty's pattern to him. So there's still some hope in that quarter. An announcement through astronomical channels would make much more of an impact than any other way. I'm also hoping to chip away astronomically by sending the 65 light-year list of stars most likely to have planets with life to Su Shu Huang, Stephen Dole, and possibly Carl Sagan. These men have all worked on the problem of extraterrestrial life from an astronomical, scientific angle. But as far as I know, no one has worked out the stars that far or broken them into groups based on probability, as my listing has done. These also have been checked and rechecked. Sagan presents a problem as, oddly enough, he's prejudiced against UFOs. This may work in our favor, if he's reasonably fair, although I've heard he may not be. If I can get him interested enough or mad enough to try to find flaws in the data, and he can't, and says so, his word as a respected scientist and as an opponent to UFOs will carry more weight. I found a few flaws in his work, and that just might get him mad enough to want to find some in mine. Another way the model may get recognition is through the Astronomical Society of the Pacific. It is respected by astronomers all over the world, and its data is used in their research papers. If they would publish the methods of making the model, and the model is accepted as accurate, the later release of Betty's pattern would carry much more force with the astronomers and almost force them to examine it. More things to be done yet. A few are to complete my revision of the 32 light-year catalog with more extensive footnotes and cross-referencing, and the additional stars found since 1957. Also, I want to correct the data to the new list that Peter Vandekamp has just put out in the Astronomy Astronomical Society of the Pacific book in February. I have the older data. There isn't too much change, just a part of a light year on several of the stars and the 2 new stars. But I want it as up-to-date as possible. So I want to extend the catalog of stars possible for life to 100 light years, which means actually a complete revision. Then I want to make a model of these stars to 100 light years. 2 models of stars out to 65 light years need to be made too. Now, one of these would take in all the stars out this far. There are 1,000 systems, or very near 1,000 systems. One of these models would just have the brighter stars, because this could be done much quicker, and then I can check out Betty's background stars to see if we can place them exactly. This would give more proof that her pattern is correct. However, I don't really expect these background stars to be as correct as the stars with the lines to them, because the ones with the lines to them were the ones that her attention was really drawn to. Because I will need cooperation from the astronomers, and premature publicity could cut it off, I must ask great discretion. Most catalogs cannot be bought. They are sent to all the observatories. Professional astronomers get them, but the amateur has trouble and must prove his need and then hope and wait and hope. It usually takes months to come. I was probably indiscreet in reporting it at all at the FSIC meeting. When I first asked to report my findings last spring, something I've never done before because I dislike public speaking, I was excited about the things I had learned in Sagan's book and how they applied to the model, and thought the group would like to know. Betty's pattern had not been definitely placed at that time. But the FSIC is discreet and careful in their reports and would be very unlikely to broadcast it. At least I hope not. I'm especially hoping it will not get into the hands of Baker and Palmer, Moseley, Steger, and John Keel. I've checked the claims of Keel on several points and found they were not what he said. I thought he was often mistaken, but at least sincere at first. Now I feel otherwise. I would like to get it in the hands of objective, critical researchers who, like yourself, demand proof, can act on it, but keep it confidential until the basic work is done and verified by APRO or others. My unsupported claim should not be accepted at face value. This worried me a bit about the FSIC meeting. I had quite a bit of technical data that I thought would be of interest to critical researchers in evaluating contactee reports, and to give additional information on my research showing data limitations and so forth. I was going to show it after the meeting. It's the kind of proof I would have demanded, but Mr. Conduso did not think that anyone would be interested. We didn't have time for it anyway, but that not interested worried me. I do a great deal of reading in many different fields, correlating data that a person interested in just a few fields might not notice. Also, I had expected to find several possible groups like Betty's pattern out of 188 plus random systems. With all these dots, you would expect to find several similar patterns, and thought people would want to check it for themselves. There's only one that really fits, but this was unexpected. It should be made up of stars most likely to have planets with life is the strongest proof that Betty's map represents reality that we have. When I started this research, I did it because it had not been done and I thought it should be checked, but I didn't really expect to find anything. Also, I wanted to know what was out there. I had expected people to want to see and actually judge for themselves, hence the individual duplicated maps. When I run into conflicting information, I usually read both sides carefully, then rig up an experiment to test it, and then decide for myself which is the correct one. This is why your questions are most welcome. I wanted to let responsible people know so that if anything happened to me like a car accident, I have a long drive to work and back every day, the work would not be lost. Also, it helps to vindicate Betty, who I greatly admire. A rather interesting point is the people I had expected to be most interested in finding out proof. The slowest to act and seem the least interested, while those that aren't even interested in the UFO field are the ones that have given me the most help. I'm quite familiar with Fate magazine. I get it fairly often, especially when they have what looks like an interesting UFO article. I read a great deal in the UFO field, even though some of it is pretty far out. I read it so that I know how to comment to people that would talk on these articles that aren't true. You at least have some way of answering them when you've read it. I have written Flying Saucer Review trying to get Valley's address. I've tried to reach him through his publishers and through Dr. Hynek, through forwarding mail at Northwestern University, and through Flying Saucer Review. Apparently he isn't interested and doesn't care to be reached at the present time. I found rather surprising because he was very kind when I first was interested in the UFO field, and it was because of him that I first got started in the field through reading Anatomy of a Phenomenon. Sincerely, Marge Fish. Marge Fish speaking. Dear Richard, I have a few corrections and additions to the talk that we had last Sunday. The main correction is several times when I spoke of Reticulum 2, when we were talking about the map and the numbers that you had drawn on the map, I spoke of it being Reticulum 2 because I was looking at your number 2, and I meant Reticulum 1, which was your number 2. This sounds very confusing, I'm sure. But twice I said Reticulum 2, and I knew that from the context of what I was talking about that I meant Reticulum 1. And I think it was because I was looking at your map, which must have had number 2 at the Reticulum 1 star. Another error was when I said that 107 Pisces was a G star. It is a K star, ranges from KO to, I think, K2, depending on the source of the information. But actually, it is a bright star. It is in one of my Group 1 stars. Other than that, the speech stands pretty well. I've had some other answers, some of the letters, since I've spoken to you. And the most important one came from Mrs. Apfel, who is Dr. Hynek's assistant. She wrote to give me some more information when I sent in my last batch of papers there, giving me Su Shu Hung's address and another source for checking spectroscopic binaries. Both of these should be quite useful. I was very, very happy to get the letter. Apparently they are reading at least some of the material that's coming in, which makes me feel much better. Su Shu Hung is, I would think, about the world authority on the planets that could have life and the stars that could have planets with life, since he does much of the original research on this. And so if anyone could spot errors in my papers, he would be one of the best ones to do it if he will do it. I just looked up 107 Pisces, and it is generally called a K1 main sequence star. This is using the, I don't know exactly how to pronounce the name, Haskek, I think, catalog. Carlos, Jaschek. He's the astronomer from the La Plata Observatory in Argentina. Actually, the Observatorio Astronómico de la Universidad Nacional de La Plata. I had a letter from him saying that he is sending my catalog, and he hopes that we will meet this winter and talk over some of the projects, like the model and possibly the negative parallax, which his catalog may help in solving. Actually, if Lee's theory is correct on negative parallax, it will be a combination of the Flash catalog and the Gliese catalog that should be able to solve the problem by taking the odd stars in the Gliese catalog and checking them out through this catalog using the Morgan-Canaan system. we should be able to spot which of these look like regular main sequence stars but are subluminous. So this may be a productive field. Of course, this is too early to tell because the correlation has not been done yet. But it should let us know one way or the other. I did not give a very good chronological listing in our talk last Sunday, so I'd like to go over that right now. I believe I read Interrupted Journey in the summer of 1966. And as I said, I wasn't too much interested in UFOs at that time, and I didn't give too much credence to the story at the time either. Then in November of that year, I read Anatomy of a Phenomenon, and this got me very interested. And after that, I joined APRO and the FSIC at the same time, or very nearly the same time. I wrote Dr. Valley the following May, and at this time I was already thinking about Betty's map and had gone over the story somewhat because I had asked him at this time if there were any maps that were done from a point of view outside of our solar system, and this was asked to check out Betty's map. I actually didn't expect there had been any done, but I thought it would be worthwhile checking to know whether to make my own maps or not, and he replied in the negative. So it was the spring and summer of 1967 when I first started to try to get the data, and didn't have any luck. Actually, it was the summer of 68 before I was able to get the star catalog. So there was about a year and a half that I was looking for the material. During this year and a half, I did a lot of reading on astronomy, and I read Sagan's Intelligent Life in the Universe and Fairchild's Life Beyond the Earth, which I had read a couple of times, and I wish to read again. It has quite a bit of very detailed material in it. I also did the research on hypnosis and the experimentation on hypnosis and thought transference and so forth that I wrote about in my letter to Dr. Sprinkle. This, of course, was not very definite. The information on hypnosis is very contradictory, and I found that with myself I could do only certain things with it, and with certain other people it worked very well. In many respects it does not work with me, and I didn't know how good a subject Betty was, or what circumstances it was done, and so forth. So it was rather inconclusive. In the thought transference experiments, they were higher than just guessing. In fact, thought transference between certain pairs of people was quite high, and there was no chance of signaling or having it hoaxed, because I was one of the participants in one of these sets of thought transferences, and I know that I wasn't even looking at the other person, but I was receiving quite well. This was using the ESP cards. I don't send well, however. But in the other kind of ESP phenomena, such as prediction, moving objects, and so forth, it was strictly at chance level. It was during this period, too, that the many trips to Toledo were made to get the material for the 16-light-year model, and the model was done with the inconclusive results. In the spring of 1968, Connie made her 16-light-year model in the cube format with the wire screening or wire hardware cloth as the top and bottom. And I liked her idea, but again I was more interested in getting complete access rather than having it blocked in. Then in the summer of 1968, I found a source for the plastic, the clear plastic that I'd been hoping to use for the model and for several other projects I had in mind, and I had it ordered. It took 3 months to come, but at least it was on its way and starting to come at this time. Also, in the summer of 1968, I got into Perkins, and got a crack at those star catalogs. Now, I didn't have any of the catalogs of my own until quite late in 1968, so all my data had to be copied out of the catalogs at Perkins. But I found the address for the Bright Star catalog, and I ordered that. It generally takes months for a star catalog to come, and this was no exception. Connie Louie, my niece, had suggested the protractor instead of the ball system that I was using, and the idea was an excellent one, so I expanded the protractor idea to make it even more convenient and worked on the methods of putting the model together. Then in the Christmas vacation of 1968, the model was finally constructed, which took most of the Christmas vacation. After Christmas, in February and March, I started to combine the data that I had in a readable form so that I could send the material into APRO and the Flying Saucer Investigating Committee in Akron. The first thing then was the star catalog, since it is absolutely necessary to understand which stars are which. After that, the page of abbreviations was done so that people could understand the star catalog, and also a brief idea of the number of bead sizes and colors and so forth, so that understanding the model would be easier. Some other teachers who were following my work suggested putting in a history of the model, so I did a couple pages of that. And then I thought I'd better put in a rationale of what I thought Betty's map could mean, and this would explain various means of investigating various possibilities within the model. Then I put in some of the early worksheets that I had done to show the weaknesses and strengths of various interpretations and the problems with any of these, because at this time I had not found the correct one, although I was on the right track. I had reached the conclusion that there were many stars that could have planets with life. At this time I thought there was around 20. Some of these have been trimmed off since then because I discovered some of these were unresolved binaries or spectroscopic binaries and were no longer suitable. Some of these were also marked as possible variables in the Bright Star catalog, and I'm always hoping for life, so I was hoping that these variables were not true variables or that it was just regular solar flaring like the sun. However, I doubt if regular solar flaring could be seen. I've been trying to find out for sure, but I don't think that the 2% change in light could be seen at the distance that some of these stars are. So I don't think it's regular solar flaring. Now, solar flaring in a smaller star like a red dwarf changes its luminosity very, very much, several magnitudes in fact. But in one like the sun, it does not change greatly. So I think this variability may be more than I had first hoped. Also, after checking the La Plata catalog, they range these stars in a 5 or 6 point spread quite often, which means that different viewers are seeing them quite differently at different places. A normal range is around 2 or 3 points within a spectrum range. So this would show that they probably are truly variable and so not suitable for life, or at least not nearly as likely. So now the range is the 13 within 32 light years plus these 2 that are just beyond this range that was quoted in the last tape. This time I also did most of the correlation by luminosity, by components, the HR diagram. Because I couldn't find the actual spread of the HR diagram, I decided to make my own using all the components within the 32 light years. So I could spot where the break-off point was as far as luminosity, where the KO and the K1 break off, since Sagan didn't give the absolute magnitude at this point. And I hadn't been able to get Doyle's book. I have his book now, but I haven't had a chance to read it. It just came in about a month ago, and I've been very busy with the data and haven't had a chance for any extra reading. So I've been standing by my HR diagram on this point, but I may need some revision once this has been checked out also. In March, I sent the data to Dr. Hynek, First, because I thought he would be interested, since he is interested in UFOs, and he has the knowledge to understand the astronomy part. And secondly, I wanted to get Dr. Valley's address, and Dr. Valley had been an associate of Dr. Hynek at Northwestern, and then I had heard that he'd gone back to France, and then I had heard that he is back in the country again, but not at Northwestern, so I was trying to reach him because I wanted him to have a copy. Also, I had a lot of astronomy questions that I could not find in the books. I'm learning my astronomy as I'm working with the data, so I have a lot of learning to do. There are still a few columns even now that I don't know exactly how to use in problems. I know pretty well what they stand for, but not exactly how they are used. But at this time, there's quite a bit I didn't know, because I'd only had the data for about 8 or 9 months. One of the things that I really slipped up on this point was the SB notations I had carefully copied out of the Bright Star catalog, and then didn't realize that they stood for the spectroscopic binaries, which I was trying desperately to find. I discovered this soon afterwards, but I'm still rather embarrassed that I hadn't caught it at that time. I did not have my own copy of the Gliese catalog, so I could not check the footnotes through the Gliese, and I did not have time to check the footnotes through the Yale trigonometric catalog at this time because I didn't have my own copy, and I didn't have time in Perkins to do it. During the winter months, my teaching hours coincide with the Perkins library hours, so I have no way of getting into the Perkins library. Besides, I wasn't quite sure at this point either that I'd be welcome back, since unauthorized personnel are not supposed to be using the library, for a very good reason, because they are in the middle of research, and it would be very disruptive to have people coming in and out all the time and asking questions, and these catalogs are very hard to come by. Another reason for contacting Dr. Hynek was the hope that he could catch any mistakes before I sent the report in to APRO. I was pretty excited about some of the things I was finding about the stars that could have planets with life, since this was all new material to me when I was reading Dr. Sagan's book, and the correlation with the model itself and finding which ones actually were the ones that could support planets with life within the model. So I contacted the FSIC to see if they would want me to explain what I'd found to the group. This is the first time, only time I've ever volunteered to speak before a group, because it does bother me to do so normally. But I thought they would be interested, and since it is a small, well-knit group, I could probably get through it all right. It seemed a very long time before I got any answers. Mrs. Apple, who is right under Dr. Hynek as assistant at Dearborn, wrote a very nice letter answering some of my questions. I had not made myself clear on one point. I was very worried about a minus in front of some of the parallaxes in the Bright Star catalog, because at this time I thought Betty's map was 2D and that they would have to use some sort of projection to make a map, possibly something like the Norden projection, to eliminate the distortion of putting a 3D celestial sphere into a 2D map. And I was planning at this time of making a model of all the bright stars within possibly 800 light years, possibly 1,000 light years, and then measuring off, taking the actual angle of elevation and the actual turn to make my own Norden type maps from the various stars that could have planets with life, so we could see what their sky maps would actually look like. This would be quite an undertaking. I expected it to take 4 or 5 years probably, and it would be rather tedious, but it would give us what their skies look like. However, this minus in front of the parallax was a factor I couldn't account for, and I thought it might change all the measurements I had taken so far in my model and all the objective measures that I had in the map model that I was planning to do of these bright stars. This was not the normal plus-minus that you have after parallax that shows the margin of error that is likely for that parallax. I just simply couldn't account for it, but it worried me quite badly. I found the answer to this one later when I got to the Perkins Observatory on June 6th. Dr. Nan kindly explained it to me, that it was the apparent backward movement of the star, and that it could be caused by the comparison stars actually moving more than the stars being measured. This raised my curiosity about negative parallax and made me much more receptive to anything I read on negative parallax. So I was very interested when I came across Vasilevsky's article on parallax and the problems of parallax. His article was the first that I realized that there were so many problems involved with taking a parallax measurement. It was quite an eye-opener and very, very interesting. The exact title of the article is The Accuracy of Trigonometric Parallaxes of Stars by S. Vasilevsky. It is from the Lick Observatory, bulletin number 206. And it is a survey of the literature. This review was conducted in December of 1965. I read the article in the Astronomy and Astrophysics Yearbook, 1966, I believe. Because of the present inaccuracy of the trigonometric parallax beyond 100 light years, I've completely given up the idea of this 800 to 1,000 light year model. Mrs. Apfel had mentioned or answered my questions on what the Roman numerals after the spectrum meant, which was very helpful. This is the MK system, or Morgan-Canaan system, and is based on the strength of some of the lines in the Fraunhofer lines in the spectrum, and breaks the stars up into groupings of main sequence subgiants. The main sequence are 5 subgiants, 4 going on into the 3, 2, 1 of the large giants. The Roman numeral 6 is your subdwarfs, and so forth. This was extremely helpful. I had already worked out a system of my own using the HR diagram and their actual luminosity. And this coincided very nicely with the MK system. And this eliminated some of the stars that I thought were likely to have life, because some of these were subgiants rather than mean sequence stars. I was very grateful for this help. To say this was sent in March. Between March and June, I had tried to work out some way of showing the subgroupings that were based on luminosity that I had found. The fact that many of these stars are clumped together or in sheets of similar type magnitudes, and these grade off into each other. There was some mixing, but there were much more groups than I had expected. I did some other correlation at this time also. Then on June 6th, well, actually June 5th, I went down to Perkins, but it was too late to get in because this was the last day of school, the finishing up of the records and so forth. So I camped overnight at the Delaware camp, and then went over to the observatory on the 6th. And Carol let me duplicate the Lisa catalog, which was a tremendous help. It is written in German, and unfortunately I don't read German, but the columns are similar to the columns of other catalogs, and the footnotes are in astronomical terms, so they are not difficult to follow. Some of the writing at the beginning of the catalog I haven't been able to follow through yet, but I'm hoping to get a translation one of these days. I was very worried about getting in. I wanted to use the data so badly, and I was so afraid that I wouldn't be allowed in. But I had a rather royal welcome. Carol was glad to see me and introduced me to the other members of the staff and showed me around the place, and I was so happy. Dr. Canaan at this time also looked up Epsilon Eridani to me, which is marked as a spectroscopic binary in the footnotes of the Bright Star catalog, but I knew it was one of the stars studied in the Project Ozma, and I was surprised that they would study it if it was a spectroscopic binary, because they said it was a single. And it turned out to be an error in the Bright Star catalog, which is extremely easy to do. I'm still catching some of my own errors. When you're copying column after column of numbers, it's very easy to get in the wrong column or transpose numbers or other copy errors. And he found this in the Batten catalog, which was just issued. So this was my first contact with the spectroscopic binary catalog. I wasn't able to find it in subsequent visits to Perkins because it was in use, so I wrote to Alan Batten later to see if I could get my own copy, which he very kindly sent. The evening of June 6th was my first trip to Akron to the FSIC meeting. Using the directions that Mr. Conduso gave me, I had no trouble at all in finding the place. So the 6th was a very eventful day. After I got home, I started correlating the data, and at this time, within just a few days, I just sent APRO their copy of the data I had at present, and I'd written that this would probably be the last that I would send until I had the 65 light-year model, that I didn't think that it could be pinned down exactly. And 2 days after this, I discovered the correct viewing angle, and everything started fitting into place very neatly. I still was considering Delta and Gamma Pavo as the two end stars on the exploration end stars, the lower ones. But I wasn't very happy with these. I hadn't been all along because they are probable variables. I learned, too, that one of these is a group 4 star, or usually classes that, although sometimes as a 5, which means that it is, this is the MK group 4 and 5, 5 being main sequence, but 4 being subgiant, which would put it as rather unlikely for life. So I thought that possibly at this time, if I could make a model of the stars in this area, since all the other stars fit in so beautifully, that these two should fit in beautifully too, if I could find the stars just outside the 32 light-year range that could be gone to instead of these. This would mean taking in the two next closest stars that would be gone to from Zeta to Cana. So I made a model of this area of the sky. However, these stars were not where I was expecting them to be. The angle was sharply back, and the lines appeared much shorter than should have been following Betty's map, unless she is making long lines, because these jumps are very long. They just appear to be short. In the meantime, I was spending the whole summer waiting for letters to return to know what to do next. I had written Dr. Stanford that I would come to Minnesota to take the material to him. I wasn't getting any replies at all from APRO, which worried me quite badly. I was rather afraid there might have been tampering, and also I was afraid that either that or they weren't taking it seriously. And then I was wondering if Betty would write, and because APRO had delayed sending the letter to her, so I didn't get a reply from her for quite a while. And I didn't want to go ahead and make other plans until I had heard to know whether I was going to Minnesota or Illinois, where Dr. Stanford was vacationing, or going to New Hampshire to see Betty, or what I was going to be doing. So it was a day-to-day basis. But in the meantime, I was correlating the data all day, every day, trying to get things worked out, rephotographed, checked through as thoroughly as possible. Finally, letters came through from Dr. Stanford saying not to come to mail the data, and a letter came through from Betty, and so we were finally in correspondence, and she said it was fine to come, and so I went then to New Hampshire. Right before going to New Hampshire, Carol had written me that Dr. Mitchell of Perkins had read my data. I was quite surprised that anyone down there would, since I am just an amateur, and had left the data, but had not expected anyone to read it. I had not included the flying saucer data since I didn't want the strictly astronomical data thrown out just because someone was not in agreement on the flying saucer material, since it is rather controversial. Dr. Mitchell wanted to see me to talk over the coordinates and so forth, and I was, of course, very delighted to go because he's a very understanding, interesting person. And so the day before I was ready to leave for New Hampshire, I went down to Perkins, and we went over the model, and he answered some of my questions and posed some problems, and it got me thinking, too, and new lines of thought. And I think it was very worthwhile for both of us, at least it was for me. He was mildly interested in the UFOs, so I rather bent his ear on the data that I had there, and he made suggestions for worthwhile, too, in this area. On the way home, I stopped in at Bargain Fair, Mr. Wiggs, and picked up the colored pictures that I had done of the model, and then put those together on the stereo slides, which takes a lot of matching, and sent a copy back to Perkins, because I had made several sets. One I had intended for Perkins, and one for Dr. Valley, if he ever writes to want them. One I wanted to send to Gleesy, and one to Peter Van de Kamp. Of course, one is sent into APRO. Since Gleesy and Dr. Van de Kamp are the two working, that I know of anyway, that are working mostly on these near stars, and they would be the ones that would be probably most interested in seeing the model. Betty has a copy also. I went to the stereopticon slides to show the model in depth. I had originally, in this April to June period, tried to do pictures in 3D using the two-color photo system, but it's quite difficult to do. I managed to do a couple, but I found that quite a few people have difficulty adjusting their eyes to the two colors, and some it makes ill. And there was a great deal of trouble getting filters that were pure enough, and then getting a mimeograph sheet that was pure enough to make the colors work. So I gave up this idea, since the colored stereopticon shows it much better. You can get a better idea of the actual colors of these stars and sizes and so forth. And far simpler. The only problem is to get stereopticons to view them with. Anyway, on the 4th and 5th of August, I saw Betty, and then saw the pictures that David Baker had drawn, and then started home. On the way home and the few weeks before school started, I was correlating the data then that I'd gotten from Betty. I sent in the summary sheet then to APRO, but waited until I got Betty's okay before I sent in the balance of our interview to make sure that I had not misinterpreted anything that she had said, and that she agreed that this was an accurate account of what our interview consisted of, since the tape recorder wasn't working properly. Or rather, I probably wasn't working the tape recorder properly. Just blame it on the tape recorder, of course. Mr. Conduso had set up October the 3rd as my speech for the FSIC meeting, so I was busy working on slides and pictures for this, so I rephotographed the model. The original photographs, the colored stereopticon pictures, were taken before I had found Betty's angle. Luckily, one of them shows it fairly well, but this was just coincidence, and the angle is much higher on this picture than the actual view angle is. Actually, I can't photograph it from Betty's exact viewing position because it hits the frame. It's quite low and hits the frame in two places, and so does not show the correlation in the best possible way. 2D pictures are very hard to interpret because you can't tell which is a small K-star close or a large K-star in the background, since they both would have about the same diameter on the slide. I had at this time also to completely repaint the model. It was out in the July 4th tornado that touched down just a few miles away from us. And of course, we had high winds and high rain. The model had been knocked over several times. The cats had gotten into it, so I had to recheck most of the stars' positions and repaint all of the stars before I could take it into the meeting, and I wanted to take it to Perkins the following day so it could be used there as I want the data used. Because I had wanted as little blockage as possible for photographing and for viewing the model, I had used a very thin, delicate wood for the original frame. This had not weathered very well, too, and so the frame itself had to be completely remade before I could move it. The plastic on the bottom was breaking because the frame was not supporting it, and I was afraid that the model would not hold up. Thanksgiving vacation the year before, I had made a quick, very small mock-up of the brighter stars in the 32 light-year range to see if I could find the pattern using them. Because I couldn't wait till Christmas, and I knew it would take the whole Christmas vacation to do the full model. This small model I had taken to Betty's, but the plastic, even though it was cushioned the whole way, had not held up, and the model had broken before I had gotten to Betty's. So I was quite worried that this model would not last the trip going down to Akron and then down to Perkins. It did, thank goodness, but I wasn't at all sure that it would. The meeting at Akron went over quite well. I was very happy, nervous as I was. And the following trip to Perkins was not uneventful, but the model did get down there safely. In September, I finally heard from APRO that they thought they were getting me all the data. I have not heard from Dr. Stanford since mid-July, I believe. But I have heard indirectly through the APRO headquarters that he thinks it's quite promising. Betty and I have been corresponding quite regularly. She is a warm, interesting person with quite a sense of humor. This week I got a letter from FSIC, which was very nice, where the members had signed a thank you letter for my talk on October 3rd. Now for a correction to a correction. The La Plata Observatory is actually titled Observatorio Astronomico de la Universidad Nacional de La Plata. I noticed in listening over to the first part of this tape that I had not pronounced it correctly. Another major correction in my written material, and I don't know how this happened, but on the summary sheet, my catalog number A, I think of it in terms of my catalog number or catalog designation rather than the Bright Star number, and the Bright Star number is 483, which I quoted correctly on the tape last Sunday. But in my summary sheet, I have it marked so that the 8 looks like a 5. And it's probable that I also copied it off the summary sheet on other material as a 5 instead of an 8. So the correct designation is 483 there instead of 453. Thanks again for everything. Sincerely, Marge Fish. This is Marjorie Fish, and it is December 28, 1969. Dear Richard, thank you very much for your Christmas card. I had hoped to get this tape out to you with my greetings to you before Christmas, but time ran out on me. The sheet, I don't know if it was discussed at the FSIC meeting, the last one, but I sent a correction sheet, and I'm going to send you one, but I want to double-check and have more of the information ready when I send it to you, since you are able to use it more than most of the others. The Gliese catalog came in, and there were a great many more changes than I was expecting. Now, as far as the 32 light-year model is concerned, there were some minor changes, again, not enough to affect the visual view of the model. However, in the hill pattern, those two that were on the end that I thought were long lines but didn't appear long in the photograph because they were dipped way back. These two stars have drastic changes in their parallax in the new Gliese catalog. And both of these, I believe, are out, or at least, well, 688 may still be in, but 755 is out. Now, some other stars have been discovered in this area, and parallax measurements taken now that weren't taken before, and some of these may be the correct ones, in which case I think probably 773.5 would be the top point, and 796 may be the bottom point. The 796 line would be very similar to Betty's line, a long line going out. 773.5 it still dips back considerably. These would be about 30 light years or 31 light years from Zeta Tucana, the jump-off point from Zeta 1 Reticulum. The parallax on Zeta 1 and 2 Reticulum has been changed. It's not as far out as the Yale Trigonometric Parallax Supplement had it, but it's not still quite as close as what the Bright Star catalog had it. They are both put out at the same parallax this time, and they are both about 36 light years away from Earth, if this last parallax measurement is correct. This does not disrupt the pattern in any way. In fact, it makes it better than what the Yale Trigonometric Supplement had it. Some other minor corrections are my catalog A star, which is the top star in the Hill pattern, is Bright Star catalog number 483. On my summary sheet, it looks like 453. Either I copied it incorrectly, or in making one copy from another copy, as I often do, it copied incorrectly. Sometimes you get a blurring in the printing. And then I may have copied it wrong off of one of these copies onto some other material. So in any case, if you'd want to check through your material, it should be 483, not 453, for the Bright Star catalog number on the last star in the V shape at the top of the Betty's pattern. Now, in these new stars, some of these parallaxes are not trigonometric parallaxes. One is just a single spectroscopic parallax, and I dislike placing too much reliance on a single parallax measurement, especially when it is a spectroscopic rather than a trigonometric parallax. But this is all we have to go by, so this is what I have to use. Another correction is I had said that only about a fourth of the area around the base stars was on the map. Actually, it is an eighth. There isn't anything over in the other fourth at the top, and this is why I said it was a fourth. But if we want to get it down to real brass tacks there, it's only an eighth of the area around the base stars is in the actual map that Betty has. Getting back to the 32 light-year model, there are 16 stars that are not in it that are in the New Gliese catalog. These are all quite dim. Some of them are about 7th absolute magnitude, but none of these are bright enough to have planets with life, at least if we understand the mechanism correctly. There may be other stars that have parallax changes that were in the old Gliese catalog that also put them in this 32 light-year range, but this hasn't been checked yet. It's one of the things I'm going to be working on very shortly. Right now I'm in the process of going through the Yale Trigonometric Parallax Catalog and pulling out all these stars in a parallax of 0.049 to 0.030. This would take all the stars from 65 light years out to 100 light years to supplement the Gliese catalog so that a model can be constructed of these stars. Now, this is for my listing of stars that could have planets with life, so I'm not going to be including the stars brighter than F5. The Yale Trigonometric Parallax Catalog does not give the groupings, like the MK groupings, so that you know which ones are main sequence stars. This has to be worked out, so I have to figure out the absolute magnitude for all of these stars. About 500 stars have been marked in the catalog. Now I have to go back over and take out those which are spectroscopic binaries, those which have the wrong magnitude, brightness, and so forth, try to figure out which of these are main sequence stars. Now, the Dole book, Habitable Planets for Man, came, and finally I have a listing of what the absolute magnitude should be for the spectrum groupings, like GO and so forth, and I've matched this with my HR diagram. And the G groupings up to about G5 match quite well. But from there on down, there is quite a difference between his groupings for the spectroscopic subgroupings and mine. So one of the first things I can do before I can finish this listing is to make an HR diagram of all the stars that are not spectroscopic binaries in the Gliese catalog, which is now well over 1,000 stars. This catalog, I should be able then to tell if his grouping is correct or if my subgroupings are more correct. I have already worked out a 2-page chart that will show what the absolute magnitude is for a given visual magnitude at a given parallax within the range of the stars that could have planets with life, using Dole's system of 6.66 as the minimum absolute magnitude. See, he says that the K1s are 6.66, whereas my K1s range about 6.1 or 6.2, and there's quite a difference here. I have written Sushu Huang twice, once to send my sheet of the stars that could have planets with life, and then to send a correction sheet, and also ask him where he thinks the absolute minimum should be, because in between the time I sent the first letter, I received the Dole book and realized the discrepancies and didn't like them to stand. He did not want to give a definite answer to the absolute minimum, since he says we have no way of knowing as yet what it is, but he sent some very interesting material, which I haven't had a chance to read yet, and I hope to be reading in the next day or so, that pertains to this question of life. The Carlos Jaschek, Horatio Conde, y Emilio de Sierra catalog of stellar spectra classified in the Morgan-Canaan system finally came in from the La Plata Observatory, and I'm checking through this list of 500 stars through this catalog also to see what stellar classification they give it, and I find a great deal of discrepancy between the Yale Trigonometric Parallax catalog and the Jaschek catalog as to what the stellar spectra of these stars is. Now only about a third of the stars in the Yale Trigonometric catalog of the ones that I'm checking are in the Jaschek catalog, mainly probably because these stars are quite dim and they're quite a ways out, and there's nothing particularly interesting in them for most astronomers. They probably aren't studied as much, since most of these are below visual magnitude stars. I'm running into some of those interesting dim stars that seem to be main sequence stars. Of course, this dimness could be caused either because there's a wrong parallax measurement, or there's a wrong spectra classification, or it may be these stars that I'm trying to see if they actually exist that could be causing the negative parallax. Again, there's many things that could cause this discrepancy between the brightness that they should be and their actual brightness, mainly in errors in measurement, but may be productive. It's one of the interesting sidelines of the things that I'm working on. Once the listing on the Gliese catalog for the stars that could have planets with life is made, and then the Yale Trigonometric Parallax listing is added to it to bring the listing out to 100 light years, I'll start working on the models so that we can check what stars, besides the ones in Betty's map, that the humanoids, assuming that they do come from there, could go to in the other areas that aren't on the map area. As soon as the model is finished, then I'll start on the 65 light-year model of all the stars in the Gliese catalog. This I expect to take quite a few months to accomplish. Another problem with the listing is what stars to include in it, because according to Sushu Huang, there's still quite a bit of discrepancy here. I unknown in what causes the planet formation. And I assume this means also that they don't know for sure whether the double stars have planets or not. Of course, in Kuiper's theory, they don't. If my interpretation of Betty's map is correct, they don't go to the double stars, even though some of these are fairly wide, spread fairly wide apart, and also the stars, the individual stars that make up a multiple system, are in the right spectrum range and so forth. However, the base stars themselves, Zeta 1 and 2 Reticuli, do form a type of double system that's very, very widespread. Again, a very crude, quick measurement, if I did it accurately, which I don't guarantee, puts them out a minimum of 3,000 astronomical units apart, which is quite far, although it's all about than a light year would be. Certainly don't guarantee my arithmetic in this case, since I hadn't double-checked it or anything, but just to give a very crude estimate. Stars are, closer together than what Pluto and the Sun is. Many of them are about Jupiter's distance, or in some cases just our distance from the Sun. There's a very wide range in the double stars as to their distance apart. It's quite difficult to say where to draw the line between a double star or those that just share a common proper motion, because those that share a common proper motion can be revolving around each other also. So it's hard to know where to say that this is a single star or this is a part of a double system. It's not known for sure whether the double stars can have planets with life. I'm going to also include two other listings, one with double stars that have a suitable component as long as the other component is not brighter. Since if it is brighter, it means that the system is a young system, and that any life would probably be destroyed when the other star turns into the red giant. However, if they're far enough apart, this might not affect the other one enough to destroy life on the planet. I'll have a third list that would list the spectroscopic binaries. Here again, they would have to be checked using Su Huang's system for measuring the suitability for a stable orbit with double stars. And I am not about to undertake this at the present time, except for listing these stars, and then anyone who wants to can go through the mathematics of deciding whether it would be suitable or not. Again, if Betty's map is correct, they don't go to any of these, which means that probably the likelihood is very small, since they are picking the very top of the cream of the ones that could have planets with life to go to, and are ignoring those that are still possible, but not as probable. In most of my calculations, I'm assuming that Betty's map is correct. It may not be, but the indications are, in my way of thinking, that they probably is correct. Another problem with the listing is the break-off points, which was discussed earlier, but this creates quite a problem. I had the other list that I made earlier in several different parts. The F5 to F8 were the ones that could be colonized. They could have life of their own, but it would not be intelligent life. And then F8 to absolute magnitude 6.0 as my group 1, and then 6.0 to 7.5 as group 2. Now, since I have the dual listing and he breaks off the absolute magnitude as 6.6, I'm going to take this as the bottom limit instead of going to 7.5. Whether to break the F5 group to F7 as a separate group, or to include it in just a listing of planets that could have life, period, whether it's intelligent or not. And this F5 to F7 has other problems in that not all of these may be revolving slowly, and I don't have rotational data on these, so some of these may not have planets. And also, if I take into account Betty's map, they don't go below 6.0 or 6.1 at most, and whether to keep these as a separate group or not is a problem. That is, to have Group 1 go, say, from F5 through absolute magnitude 6.0, and then take it from 6.1 to 6.6 as a separate subgroup, or whether to have the whole listing as one single group. I think what I shall probably do is list them from F5 down to 6.6, and then add a separate note for those that are interested in the UFO data as such, that they can make their own listing, eliminating those that are too low in magnitude. I haven't decided entirely on this. I still have a lot of work to do in the checking of these stars and getting them listing. Another problem in listing is that the stars in the Gliese catalog are the 1950 epoch, and the stars in the Yale trigonometric and the Morgan-Canaan system, the Yastrik catalog, are in the 1900 epoch. And this means that all the stars in those catalogs have to be changed over to the 1950 epoch, or the ones in the Gliese catalog have to be changed over to the 1900 epoch before they can be listed in an order, since the placement would be off considerably on some of them. Again, I probably should list them both ways, which means I'll have to list probably all. I imagine there'll be at least 300 or 400 stars in the final listing, in just the single stars alone, to say nothing of the double star listing and the spectroscopic binary listing. For this, the proper motion of some of these stars changes their position from the 1900 to the 1950 listing, and I haven't worked with the figuring out the actual proper motion and related this to the just the normal epoch changing position. I don't think it'll take too much to learn it, but it's something I haven't worked with yet, and so I'm going to have a lot of learning to do before I even begin to tackle all of this. Dr. Van de Kamp sent a very interesting packet on information on the near stars and other things that arrived yesterday, which I'm very anxious to get at, too. Actually, I've received letters from almost every place that I sent. I haven't received anything from Dr. Sagan yet, or Dr. Vasilevsky. Not that I really expected to get data from either one of them, but I was hoping. Dr. Sagan was sent to the wrong address. I had sent it to where he was when he was writing Intelligent Life in the Universe, but it wasn't returned, so I assumed it was forwarded to him. I made a trip to Perkins Observatory on December 6th. They normally aren't open on Saturday, but Dr. Mitchell came and let me in, and we talked over the project that his students are doing with the near stars and this odd groupings that I discovered in the model. And there's only been one report that's been turned in, but it showed a high clustering of the 10th magnitude stars out in the 65 light-year range. That is, it's in beyond the 32 light-year model, but it's very definitely a clumping of them. I'm hoping to learn how the other ones turned out. I'll be able to pin these down quite accurately once the 65 light-year model of all the stars is made. But again, this will take quite a while to do. Started on the books you lent me. The Great Soul Trial is very interesting. I just have a good beginning on it. This is the first chance I've had to sit down and relax for a month. I certainly appreciate your lending them to me. I'll get them back to you as soon as possible. I hope to have the HR diagram done possibly sometime tomorrow, or at least sometime next week. I'm doing about 5, 6, 7 different things at the same time. It gets rather confusing at times. Well, again, have a very good New Year, and good luck in your taping and your other work. Oh, if you have a chance, I would like a copy of anything that you have on Barney or Betty on your tapes, or any case that is similar to this, the normal contactee report type thing. I'm interested in sociologically, but not too interested in the tapes unless you think it is an authentic experience. Much of the regular contactee material, I believe, is probably just tapping unconscious material, such as is done in automatic writing. where it seems to be coming from an outside source, but is actually coming from the person themselves at a subconscious level. This may not be true for all of them, but I think it is true for quite a few of the contactee type thing. However, it may mask some of the real physical things that are taking place, which I think Betty's experience was one, and I'm sure there probably are a good many others that are. However, I doubt if these are your normal contactees. Getting into another area, I got a Ray Palmer Flying Saucer magazine the other day that had one interesting item. There's a clipping service that is sort of a share-the-cost thing. It's $3 per month, and the address is Research Committee, Rod Dyke, that's D-Y-K-E, Director. Sounds quite interesting. The magazine as a whole, I think, is pure nonsense, but sometimes it has some interesting things in the letters. It has been somewhat better lately. I read Mr. Farish's article on fate. It was quite interesting. I'm going to be turning the tape over now and go over some corrections to the first part of the tape. In listening to it, I realized there's some things I didn't make very clear. This is Monday, December 29th. I did some more reading in the Soul Trial, and I also did quite a bit of work on the checking of the stars in the Yale Trigonometric Parallax Catalog. And I'm running into some more problems with some of these odd stars. First of all, on the tape on the other side, I had mentioned that I was taking this list out to parallax 30 and said it was 100 light years. Actually, parallax 0.032 is 100 light years, but I'm taking out a little bit farther because it's easier to pull all the parallaxes out within a certain set number, so I'm pulling out all the 4s and 40s and 30s. Because parallax is rather shaky this far out, this may catch a few that were placed a little farther out than what they should have been, and so they'll still be included in the list. Speaking of the accuracy of the data, perhaps I can go over this a little bit to clarify it. Out to about 10 light years, our measurements are quite accurate within a small fraction of a light year. Out to 20 light years, there are a few stars that vary from one catalog to another as much as 1 or 2 light years, but this is rare. Usually it's only about a half light year difference. When you get out to the 32 light years, most of the stars are fairly stable from one measurement to another, but a few have quite a few changes in measurement, including the base stars. By the time you get out to the 65 light years, there's quite a bit of difference in measurements from one source to another, and of course out to the 100 light years, it is getting rather shaky. So my listing will not be completely accurate, and this may account for some of these odd stars that seem to be way too bright or way too dim for the parallax that they have, because your absolute magnitude depends on the distance out, which of course depends on the parallax reading. And if this is off, then your absolute magnitude as it is figured is off, and so your magnitude spectrum ratio is going to be off. And so I think probably in my total list I'll probably include the F5 through the absolute magnitude 6.6, and even though this will extend over the range on either side, it should pull in the stars, so I'll probably have some that don't really qualify as the best stars to have life, but the list should include most of the stars that should have life. As far as the stars that we've measured parallax go, as I mentioned before, there's quite a few that haven't had the parallax measured, and I hadn't realized how many, so there may be quite a few that are not on the list because we do not know how far out they are. Getting back to Betty's map and the difference between the old Gliese catalog and the new Gliese catalog, most of them had very little changes. There were a few changes. 54 Pisces is out about 2 light years farther in the new Gliese catalog than what it was in the old. This may account for Betty's statement, which rather worried me because it didn't hold true for the old one, that it seemed quite far out. whereas actually it wasn't really any farther from the base stars than my A star, which he thought seemed a little nearer. So Zeta Tucana is 23.3 light years in the new Lisi catalog, which is about 1 year difference from what it was before. Other than the two stars that were mentioned on the other side of the tape, which I want to finish the model before I definitely say which two they are, these are the only major changes in the new Gliese from the old Gliese catalog. This is all that I have at this time, so again, have a good New Year. Sincerely, Marjorie Fish.